my mom yelled. "You've been nothing but a burden since you were born." Then she threw my bags on the lawn and said, "Go be someone else's problem." I left without saying a word. 3 weeks later, Dad called, panicking. "Why is the bank taking our house?" I texted back, "Ask the burden." That's when everything fell apart. I'll never forget the words my mother screamed at me. "You've been nothing but a burden since you were born." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the biggest burden I carried was actually their dirty secret, and I was about to expose it all. My name is Michael, and for as long as I can remember, my family made me feel like I was always one step out of place. I grew up in a small house on the edge of town with my mom, dad, and younger sister. We weren't exactly poor, but my parents never missed a chance to remind me that every single penny spent on me was a profound sacrifice. Birthdays, school trips, even a new pair of shoes. It always came with a lecture about how lucky I was, how they hadn't just left me to fend for myself. I was the quiet kid, the one who got decent grades, worked after-school jobs, and stayed out of trouble. But to them, none of that counted. My sister? She could crash the car into the mailbox, and it was kids make mistakes. But if I came home 5 minutes late from my shift at the grocery store, I got a full-blown speech about respect and pulling my weight. Over time, I learned to keep my head down and avoid conflict, but deep down, a quiet rage was boiling. By the time I was 18, I'd saved enough to buy a second-hand car. Nothing fancy, just something to get me to work in college. The day I drove it home, my dad didn't congratulate me. He asked why I hadn't used the money to help out with the bills. My mom chimed in. "Must be nice to spend all your money on yourself." That became a theme. Anything I did for myself was selfish. When I paid my own tuition through scholarships and part-time jobs, they called me stubborn for not asking them for help. When I moved back home after graduation to save for a place of my own, they acted like I was freeloading. And this was despite me paying rent, buying my own food, and fixing things around the house without ever being asked. It wasn't one big fight that made things snap. It was years of little moments stacking up, until the weight became unbearable. My sister, now 21, still lived at home too. But she was treated like a guest of honor. She didn't pay rent. She didn't clean. She used my tools without asking, borrowed money from me without paying it back, and left her dishes in the sink like it was someone else's job. When I mentioned it once, my mom sighed. "She's just figuring things out, Michael. Don't be so harsh." Meanwhile, if I so much as left my work boots by the door, it was a lecture about respecting the house. The night things truly started to unravel was a Thursday. I'd just come home from a brutal shift, 12 hours on my feet, dealing with an inventory nightmare at the warehouse. I barely had time to drop my bag when my mom called from the kitchen. "Michael, we need to talk." Those 4 words never meant anything good. I walked in to see her standing there, arms crossed. And right by the door, my suitcase. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice already tight. She didn't even hesitate. "You've been nothing but a burden since you were born," she said, like she was just stating a fact. My dad was leaning against the counter, silent, but nodding. My sister was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone like this was a reality show, and she had front row tickets. I tried to keep calm. "I pay rent. I fix things around here." You have an attitude." My mom cut me off. "You think you're better than us because you pay for things? If you're so independent, then be independent somewhere else." And then she picked up my bag, dragged it outside, and dropped it on the lawn. "Go be someone else's problem." I wish I could say I yelled back, that I said something clever or dramatic, but I didn't. I just stared at them for a long moment, grabbed my keys, and walked out. No goodbye, no slam of the door, just silence. That night, I slept in my car in a grocery store parking lot, staring at the ceiling and wondering how it had come to this. It felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I kept replaying her words over and over, "Nothing but a burden." It hurt in a way I can't even describe, not just because she said it, but because for a second, I actually believed it. The next few weeks were rough. I stayed with a friend from work, crashing on his couch while I figured out my next move. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from home, I ignored it. I couldn't face them. Not yet. I threw myself into work, picked up extra shifts, and started quietly building a plan for my future. Then, exactly 3 weeks later, my phone lit up with a call from my dad. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. His voice was panicked. "Michael, why is the bank taking our house?" My heart pounded. I hadn't done anything directly, but I knew what he was talking about, and I knew exactly what I was going to say. I hung up without explaining, typed out a single text, and hit send. Ask the burden. I could practically feel the silence on the other end, and that's when everything truly started to fall apart. 3 days after I sent that text, the calls started coming, one after another. First Dad, then Mom, then even my sister, who never called me unless she needed something. I didn't pick up. I wasn't ready to hear their voices. The voicemail notifications piled up, each one more desperate than the last. At first, it was yelling, "Michael, what did you do?" Then it was pleading, "We just need to talk." Eventually, it turned into guilt trips. "You can't turn your back on your family when we need you most." I kept my phone on silent and went to work like nothing had happened. But inside, my thoughts were a mess. A part of me wanted to drive over there, sit them down, and explain everything. The other part, the bigger part, felt like I finally had a little bit of power. For once, they were the ones scrambling. For once, they were the ones feeling the weight of their decisions. I hadn't expected things to spiral this fast. 3 weeks ago, I was paying rent, quietly patching holes in the drywall, and unclogging the shower drain. 3 weeks ago, I was helping keep that house running. I'd been the one making sure the mortgage payments got sent in on time because somewhere along the line, my parents had started leaving their mail unopened and letting due dates slip. I wasn't on the mortgage, but I had access to their online account because they didn't understand how to set up autopay. Every month, I'd log in, transfer money from my account, and make sure the payment went through. I told myself it was just temporary, just until things got better. When they kicked me out, I stopped paying. Simple as that. I figured they'd notice and take over. I didn't expect them to ignore it for nearly a month. By the end of that first week after Dad's call, the tone of their messages had shifted. My mom left a voicemail that said, "We wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't been so dramatic. You could have just stayed and helped us like a normal son." That one made me laugh out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Even now, she still saw me as the problem, not the fact that they'd thrown me out with no warning. I didn't reply, but I did start hearing things from other relatives. My Aunt Caroline, who I'd always been close with, called me one night. "Honey," she said gently, "your mom told the family you abandoned them when they needed you. She's saying you're selfish, that you cut them off to punish them." "Did she mention that she threw my stuff on the lawn and told me to leave?" I asked. There was a pause. "No," my aunt admitted. "She left that part out." I sighed, rubbing my forehead. Figures. That was the thing about my parents. They were experts at rewriting the story so that they came out looking like the victims. When my sister failed a class in high school, it was somehow my fault because I didn't help her enough. When Dad's car broke down, I was blamed for not reminding him to get an oil change. And now, losing the house was being pinned on me for not swooping in to save them. 2 weeks passed, and I started hearing about the house from neighbors, too. Apparently, the bank had put a notice on the front door. Word spread fast in a neighborhood like ours. My sister posted something vague and dramatic on Instagram. A black screen with white text. "Can't believe how heartless some people are. Family is supposed to be there when you need them." The comments were full of her friends saying things like, "Stay strong, queen," and "Whoever hurt you doesn't deserve you." I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. But that weekend, I made the mistake of going back to grab a few boxes from the garage. My tools, some winter clothes, a box of old photos. I figured it would be quiet, middle of the afternoon, everyone usually out. I was wrong. When I pulled into the driveway, my mom was sitting on the porch. She didn't even wait for me to get out of the car before starting in. "So, you can show up to take your junk, but you can't answer the phone?" I kept my voice calm. "I came to get my stuff. That's all." "You're tearing this family apart, Michael," she snapped. "Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Your sister can't sleep. We could be out on the street any day now, and you don't even care." I clenched my jaw, fighting to keep my composure. I cared for years. I paid bills that weren't mine. I kept this house afloat while everyone else ignored what was happening. And the one time I needed a place to stay, you threw me out. She crossed her arms, eyes cold. "Because you were disrespectful. You think money makes you better than us." I laughed bitterly. "No, Mom. I think actions have consequences. You wanted me gone? Well, I'm gone." Before she could reply, my sister came out of the house, holding her phone like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Wow," she said loudly, rolling her eyes. "So, You really don't care if we lose everything? I stared at her, stunned by how casual she sounded. Lose everything? You mean the house you don't pay a dime toward? The bills you never touch? The food you eat that someone else buys? Stop being dramatic, she shot back. It's not just about money. It's about family. Something in me snapped. Family. I repeated, my voice rising. Family doesn't throw you out like trash because you asked for a little respect. For a moment, there was silence. My mom's face turned red, and I could see the vein in her temple throbbing. You are not welcome here anymore, she hissed. I nodded slowly. Good, I said quietly. Because I'm done trying. I grabbed my boxes from the garage, loaded them into my car, and left without another word. My hands were shaking as I drove away, but under the anger was something else, a strange, cold clarity. For years, I'd been the one trying to fix things, trying to keep the family together. But maybe it wasn't my job anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the porch argument in my head, my mom's voice echoing in the silence. I wondered if I'd gone too far. But then I thought about all the times I'd bitten my tongue. All the times I'd let things slide just to keep the peace. Maybe it was time for the peace to break. And then something happened that turned everything from tense to explosive. A letter arrived at my friend's place, forwarded from my old address. It was from the bank, addressed to me. And when I opened it, my heart stopped. When I tore open that letter from the bank, I expected the usual, some generic notice about a missed payment or maybe a final reminder about the mortgage. But as soon as my eyes scanned the first paragraph, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a generic reminder. It was a foreclosure warning addressed not just to my parents, but with my name printed right there next to theirs. At first, I thought it had to be some kind of clerical mistake. I'd never signed anything related to the house, or so I thought. But as I kept reading, I saw my name listed as a co-signer on the mortgage. My signature was at the bottom of the attached document, plain as day. My first reaction was confusion. I racked my brain trying to remember ever agreeing to this. Then I felt a wave of ice-cold anger. I knew that signature. It was mine, but not from signing a mortgage. It was from a completely different form I had signed almost 2 years ago when my parents had asked me to help them out by co-signing for a small home improvement loan so they could fix the roof. Except this wasn't just the roof loan. This was the full refinanced mortgage on the house. My hands were shaking as I flipped through the pages. I saw the dates, the loan amount, the interest rate, much higher than I ever would have agreed to. And that's when the realization hit me like a freight train. My parents had refinanced the house in my name without telling me what I was actually signing. I couldn't breathe for a second. It felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. All those months, I'd been paying the mortgage to help out. I hadn't just been doing them a favor. I'd been paying off a debt that legally had my name attached to it. I felt sick. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Caroline. She picked up on the second ring. Aunt Caroline, I said, my voice trembling. Did you know my parents refinanced the house in my name? There was a pause on the other end. Oh, honey, she said softly. I was afraid you'd find out. I sat up straighter. You knew? I knew they refinanced, yes. Your mom said you agreed to help. She told everyone how proud she was that you were stepping up for the family. I assumed you knew exactly what you were signing. My throat tightened. I didn't know. I thought I was signing a small repair loan. They tricked me. Caroline sighed. Michael, I'm so sorry. They've been drowning financially for years. Your dad made some bad investments, and your mom didn't want to lose the house. I think they thought you wouldn't notice. I noticed, I said bitterly. After we hung up, I just sat there, staring at the letter. My thoughts were spinning so fast it felt like my brain couldn't keep up. Every memory from the past 2 years suddenly looked different under this new light. My parents' smugness when I announced I had paid off my car. Their insistence that I handle the online payments. The way my mom would say, don't worry about the details. Just sign here. It was betrayal, pure and simple. They hadn't just disrespected me. They had used me. I didn't sleep that night. I kept pacing the small living room of my friend's apartment, letter in hand, rage boiling just under the surface. By morning, I knew I had to confront them. When I pulled into the driveway later that day, there was a moving truck parked outside. My sister was sitting on the porch steps, crying into her phone. My mom was pacing the yard, shouting at someone on speakerphone. My dad was nowhere to be seen. Michael, my mom barked when she saw me. Finally, you have to fix this. They can't take our house. Your house? You're on the mortgage. I held up the letter. Yeah, I said, my voice shaking with fury. I know. She blinked. thrown off for a second. Then you understand. We're all in this together. You have to help us. No, I said flatly. I don't. You lied to me. You tricked me into signing this. She narrowed her eyes. Tricked you? We didn't trick you. We asked for your help. We told you it was important. You told me it was a roof loan. I shouted. You didn't tell me you were putting my name on a mortgage worth $200,000. Do you have any idea what that does to my credit? To my future? She waved a hand like I was being dramatic. It's just paperwork. We needed you. You're our son. That's what family does. No, I said again, louder this time. Family asks. Family doesn't forge trust and hope nobody notices. Do you even realize you could have ruined my life if I hadn't caught this? My sister stood up, glaring at me through her tears. You're being selfish. If you cared about us at all, you'd help. You'd make the payments. You're letting us get thrown out on the street. Something in me snapped. You think I haven't been helping? I shouted. I've been paying your bills for months. I paid the mortgage while you two were out getting new phones and going on weekend trips. And what do I get in return? You toss me out like garbage and then act shocked when I stop cleaning up your mess. My mom's face twisted with anger. You ungrateful little. I cut her off. I co-signed a house I don't even own. I kept this place afloat while you pretended everything was fine. And you still had the nerve to call me a burden. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stood there, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Finally, she said, if you don't pay, we'll lose everything. I stared at her, my hand still shaking. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you threw me out. I turned and walked back to my car. My mom shouted after me. My sister cried louder. But I didn't stop. As I drove away, my chest was tight. Not just with anger, but with something sharper, heavier. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was personal. They hadn't just taken my money. They had taken my trust, my security, my peace of mind. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive them for it. Driving away from that house felt like tearing off a bandage and realizing the wound underneath was still raw, still bleeding. I parked my car at a gas station a few miles away and just sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. My anger had burned hot, but now it was being replaced by something heavier, a hollow kind of ache that sat right in my chest. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was the look on my mom's face when I told her I knew about the mortgage. Not guilty, not ashamed, just angry that I wasn't still playing along. For years, I believed that if I worked hard enough, if I kept paying rent and doing chores and being the good son, they'd eventually see me as an equal. But that moment proved they never had. I'd just been convenient. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. At work, I could keep it together. I threw myself into my shifts, taking every bit of overtime I could get. But the second I was alone, everything hit me like a wave. I'd lie awake at night on my friend's couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my own parents could sign me onto a $200,000 mortgage without telling me, wondering what else they'd done behind my back. And then came the calls from the bank. I ignored them at first, terrified of what they might say. But one afternoon, I finally picked up. Mr. Johnson? The voice on the other end said, we're calling regarding the delinquent mortgage on 1247 Ridgeway Lane. We've attempted contact with the other signers, but you're the only one who's responded. Are you planning to bring the account current? I felt like my throat was closing. I can't, I admitted. I don't live there anymore. I didn't even know I was on the mortgage until recently. The woman on the line sighed like she'd heard this 1,000 times. Unfortunately, as a co-signer, you're legally responsible for the debt. If the account is not brought current, this will proceed to foreclosure. This will impact your credit score and could result in legal action. When I hung up, I felt sick. My credit was one of the few things I had going for me. It was the reason I'd been approved for my car loan, the reason I'd been able to rent my apartment after college before moving back home. And now it was about to get wrecked because of something I never agreed to. I didn't tell anyone about the call, not even Aunt Caroline. I just went quiet. I started skipping lunch breaks at work to save money, funneling every spare dollar into my savings account. I stopped going out with friends, stopped buying anything that wasn't strictly necessary. I knew I couldn't fix the house situation, not by myself, but I could at least prepare for whatever came next. One night after another late shift, I sat in my car outside the warehouse and let myself cry for the first time in years. Not just from anger or frustration, but from grief. I was grieving the family I thought I had. The version of my parents who cared about me more than their own pride. The home that I had worked so hard to keep together, thinking it was worth saving. I thought about driving back and trying one more time to reason with them. Maybe if I explained how this would destroy my credit, they'd understand. But then I remembered my mom's voice on the porch. It's just paperwork. We needed you. There had been no apology, no regret, just entitlement. So I stayed away. Weeks passed. The foreclosure process moved forward. I started getting more letters, this time addressed directly to me. Legal notices, credit warnings, statements showing how much was past due. Every envelope was another reminder that my life was being dragged into chaos by people who hadn't spoken a kind word to me in months. I stopped answering my parents' calls completely. Eventually, they stopped calling too. But then came a text from my sister. Hope you're happy. We have to be out by the end of the month. Mom says you ruined everything. I stared at it for a long time before putting my phone down. At work, my boss noticed I was quieter than usual. One night, he pulled me aside. You okay, man? You've been off lately. I hesitated, then told him a little about what was going on. Not everything, just enough. He shook his head. That's rough, but you know what? You can't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. If they put you in this position, that's on them. His words stuck with me, and that's when something in me started to shift. Instead of feeling helpless, I started making lists, literal lists, of what I wanted my life to look like in a year, where I wanted to live, how much I wanted to have saved, the kind of job I wanted. It was the first time in months I felt like I had a little control. I started applying for better-paying positions at other warehouses. I cut ties with anyone who tried to guilt-trip me about the house situation. I even opened a separate bank account and moved my savings into it, just to make sure there was no chance my parents could get access the way they had before. But the biggest thing I did was start quietly gathering every piece of documentation I had. Copies of the mortgage papers, screenshots of the payments I had made, even old text messages where my mom had asked me to sign just a small loan. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with them, but I knew I needed to have them. By the time the end of the month rolled around, the house was officially in foreclosure. My parents had to leave. I didn't go to help them pack. I didn't even drive by to watch. But one evening, Aunt Caroline called me. They're moving into your uncle's basement for now, she said. Your mom is furious. She says you abandoned them. I swallowed hard. I didn't abandon them. They abandoned me first. Caroline was quiet for a moment. I know, and I think deep down they know it, too. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at the stack of documents I had collected, feeling the anger simmering under the surface. Losing the house wasn't the end of this. Not for me. I still had a credit score in freefall, still had my name tied to a debt that wasn't mine. And for the first time, I started to think not just about surviving, but about making sure this never happened again to me or anyone else. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this like it was nothing. The foreclosure officially went through about 6 weeks later. I didn't even have to check online. The moment it happened, my phone buzzed with a flood of messages from my parents. Angry ones, desperate ones, even a few that tried to play the victim card. But by then, something inside me had shifted. Instead of crumbling under the guilt like I would have a year ago, I felt oddly calm. Maybe it was because I had been expecting this outcome for weeks. Maybe it was because I had spent so many late nights staring at the ceiling, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. And now that the worst had actually happened, I was still here, still breathing, still standing. And standing was enough to start building again. I had been secretly applying to jobs outside of my small town, places where I could start fresh. One morning, after a grueling overnight shift, I got an email that made my heart leap. A warehouse management position 2 towns over wanted to interview me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a step up, salaried with benefits, and most importantly, far away from the place where I had been made to feel like I didn't belong. I prepped for that interview like my life depended on it, because in a way, it did. I researched the company, rehearsed my answers, even borrowed a proper button-down from my friend so I'd look professional. When the day came, I drove out there nervous but determined. The interview went better than I could have hoped. They were impressed by my experience, the fact that I had been running inventory systems practically by myself at my last job. A week later, I got the call. I was hired. That was the first real win I'd had in months, and it felt like a dam breaking. Suddenly, there was momentum in my life again. With the higher salary, I was able to get my own apartment, small, but mine. No couch surfing, no relying on anyone else's goodwill. I furnished it slowly, one paycheck at a time. A thrift store table, a secondhand couch, a decent mattress. Every piece I brought into that space felt like a declaration. This is my life now. This is my home. I also started repairing the damage to my credit. I sat down with a financial advisor, explained the whole nightmare, and together we worked out a plan. It wasn't quick. Nothing about rebuilding credit ever is, but there was something deeply satisfying about taking control of it. Every time I made an on-time payment on my small personal credit card, every time I saw my score inch up a few points, it felt like reclaiming a little piece of my future. And through it all, I didn't speak to my parents. Not once. They tried, of course. At first, it was angry texts. Then it turned into guilt trips. We just want our family back. Your sister misses you. We can't believe you'd hold a grudge over something so small. That one made me laugh. So small. Signing me onto a massive mortgage without telling me, and then throwing me out of the house was apparently a small thing. Eventually, they stopped reaching out altogether. And you know what? The silence was peaceful. As the months passed, I threw myself into my new job. I worked hard, learned everything I could, and before long, I was promoted again. This time to oversee a team. It felt strange at first, having people look to me for guidance, but I realized I was good at it. I'd spent years managing chaos at home, juggling responsibilities no one else wanted. Now I was being paid to do it and respected for it. For the first time in my life, I started to feel proud of myself, not just for surviving, but for building something on my own. I didn't broadcast any of it to my family. No social media posts, no updates. But I heard through the grapevine that my parents had moved into a small rental apartment and that things were tense between them. Apparently, the foreclosure had driven a wedge into their marriage. Dad blamed Mom for refinancing. Mom blamed Dad for losing his job, and both of them blamed me for abandoning them. Meanwhile, I was thriving. I reconnected with a few old friends I hadn't seen since high school. People who remembered me before all the drama weighed me down. One of them, a guy named Drew, introduced me to a mentor of his who worked in logistics consulting. That connection eventually led me to start taking night classes in supply chain management. It was grueling balancing work and school, but for the first time, every step forward felt like it was mine. By the end of the year, I had enough savings to pay off my car completely and start an emergency fund. I even started thinking about buying a small condo one day, under my name and my name only. It was around this time that my sister tried to reach out again. She sent me a long, rambling message about how hard things had been, how she wished we could go back to the way things were. I almost replied. Almost. But then I remembered standing on that porch, her calling me selfish while I was trying to hold everything together. I left the message on read. Still, her reaching out stirred something in me. Not guilt, not anymore, but resolve. Because while I had moved on, the legal mess was still technically tied to me. The foreclosure was still on my record, still dragging my credit down, still a reminder of how easily my life could be wrecked by someone else's decisions. And every time I saw it listed on my credit report, the anger came back. So, I started researching. I spent late nights reading about cosigner fraud, about predatory lending, about what legal recourse people had when their signature was misused. I learned more about mortgages in 2 weeks than I had in the previous 2 years combined. I even scheduled a consultation with a lawyer just to see what my options were. The lawyer confirmed what I already suspected. If I could prove that I had been misled about what I was signing, that I had been told it was a small repair loan when it was actually a full mortgage refinance, I might have a case. Maybe not to undo the foreclosure, that ship had sailed, but to have the debt legally removed from my record. It wouldn't be easy. It would take time, money, and a lot of documentation. But I had all three now. And that's when I realized I wasn't just going to rebuild my life. I was going to make sure that what they did to me followed them, legally, financially, and socially, until they had to face it. For months, they had made me feel powerless. But now I had something they didn't expect. Leverage. The first step in my plan wasn't dramatic. No confrontation, no heated arguments. It was quiet, methodical, and almost boring. But it was also the most important thing I'd ever done for myself. I started by gathering every single piece of evidence I could find. Old texts from my mom, screenshots of my bank transfers, copies of the emails confirming I had made the mortgage payments for months. I even dug up a voice message she'd left me around the time of the refinance, saying, "Just sign it, Michael. It's nothing big, just for the roof." I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it was a crucial piece of proof that I'd been misled. The bank statements were the hardest to look at. Each one was a reminder of just how much money I had poured into that house while being told I wasn't doing enough. It made me angry all over again, but it also fueled me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about setting the record straight and making sure no one could ever use me like that again. I organized everything into folders on a USB drive and backed it up in 3 separate places: my laptop, the cloud, and a secure external hard drive. I wasn't going to risk losing any of it. Then I started making calls. The lawyer I had consulted with months earlier remembered me immediately. "Ah, you're the one with the co-signed mortgage situation," he said. "Did you decide to pursue it?" "Yes," I said simply. "And I have proof now." He had me come into the office with all my documents. We spent nearly 2 hours going through everything line by line. By the end, he leaned back in his chair and let out a low whistle. "This is strong," he said. "You can absolutely make a case that you were misled. At the very least, you could get this off your credit report. At most, you could sue for damages." I didn't even hesitate. "Let's do it." Over the next few weeks, we filed the necessary paperwork: a formal dispute with the credit bureaus, a complaint with the bank's fraud department, and finally, a demand letter to my parents, informing them that unless they were willing to come to the table and negotiate a settlement, I would be pursuing legal action. That letter wasn't meant to scare them. It was meant to make them take me seriously. And judging by what happened next, it worked. A week after the letter was delivered, my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was my dad. "What are you trying to do to us?" he said without even saying hello. His voice was tight, angry. "I'm trying to get my name cleared," I said calmly. "You signed me onto a mortgage without my knowledge. You ruined my credit. I'm just fixing what you broke." "You're going to bankrupt us?" he snapped. I almost laughed. "You already bankrupted yourselves. I'm just making sure I don't go down with you." He started to argue, but I cut him off. "You have 30 days to respond to the letter. Talk to your lawyer." And then I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt like I was the one in control. Around this time, my life outside of the legal battle was thriving more than ever. My new job had turned into something of a passion for me. I had been promoted again, this time to operations coordinator, which meant I wasn't just running a warehouse. I was helping design systems that made the entire supply chain run smoother. The company even paid for me to take a certification course, which would open the door to even higher positions down the line. And with the higher paychecks, I was able to accelerate my financial recovery. I paid off my remaining debts, built up a proper emergency fund, and even started investing a little each month. Watching my accounts grow was satisfying in a way that was hard to put into words. For so long, money had been a source of tension and guilt. Now, it was a symbol of freedom. One night, as I was going through some final paperwork with my lawyer, he said something that made me pause. "You know, Michael, cases like this are rare because most people don't have the courage to stand up to their own family. They just take the hit and move on." I thought about that as I drove home. He was right. The old me would have done exactly that. I would have taken the hit, shouldered the blame, and kept paying for mistakes that weren't mine. But not anymore. The last piece of the puzzle came unexpectedly. I got an email from the bank saying they had completed their investigation and determined that I had in fact been misled during the refinance process. They couldn't undo the foreclosure, but they agreed to remove the mortgage from my credit history and issue me a letter stating that I was not financially responsible for the remaining debt. It was the vindication I had been waiting for. But I wasn't done. I knew that letter would be a powerful tool, not just for clearing my name, but for proving to anyone who doubted me that I hadn't been the villain in this story. And part of me, a big part, wanted my parents to see it. Wanted them to know that their attempt to control me had failed. I decided to wait, to time things carefully. There was a family reunion coming up in a few months. The first big one since the house was lost. Everyone would be there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the perfect audience. I started quietly preparing for that day, printing copies of the letter, compiling a simple timeline of events, even organizing the proof into a binder. I wanted to be ready when they tried to spin the story again and make me out to be the selfish son who abandoned them. Every step of preparation felt like reclaiming a little more of the dignity I had lost. By the time the reunion drew near, I was no longer the broken kid they had kicked out. I was calm, collected, and fully in control. And I was ready to show them exactly what the burden had become. The reunion was held at my Aunt Caroline's place, a sprawling backyard barbecue that in past years had been the highlight of my summer. As I pulled up in my car, I felt a strange mix of nerves and calm. My binder sat on the passenger seat, neat and organized, a physical reminder that I wasn't here to fight. I was here to tell the truth once, clearly, and without apology. When I stepped out of the car, I saw my mom right away. She was standing near the grill with my dad, both of them looking a little more weathered than the last time I'd seen them. My sister was there, too, sitting on a lawn chair with a soda in her hand, scrolling her phone like nothing had changed. For a brief moment, I wondered if they thought today would be business as usual, that I would just show up, pretend nothing happened, and go along with the family narrative. Not this time. I made my rounds, greeting relatives I hadn't seen in months. Most of them were polite, but curious. A few gave me the kind of sympathetic smile that told me they'd heard my parents' side of the story. I didn't rush to explain myself. I just smiled, shook hands, and waited. The turning point came, as I knew it would, when someone inevitably brought up the house. "So, Michael," my Uncle Ben said casually over a plate of ribs. "Your mom was telling us about the foreclosure. Tough break, huh?" My mom, who was sitting 2 chairs away, nodded solemnly. "Yes," she said loud enough for half the yard to hear. "It was the hardest thing we've ever been through. Losing the house, having to move, and all because Michael decided to walk away when we needed him most." There it was, the narrative I'd been waiting for. I felt the entire table glance at me, waiting for my reaction. My dad crossed his arms. My sister smirked like she expected me to squirm, but instead, I calmly set down my drink, reached into my bag, and pulled out the binder. "I'm glad you brought that up," I said evenly, "because there's something everyone here should know." The yard went quiet. Even the kids stopped running around. I opened the binder to the first page, a copy of the mortgage document with my signature on it. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the mortgage on my parents' house. Notice how my name is right there as a cosigner." A few relatives frowned. One of my cousins asked, "Wait, you were on the mortgage?" "Yes," I said, "except when I signed this. I was told it was for a small home improvement loan to fix the roof, not a full mortgage refinance for over $200,000. I didn't even know I was legally responsible until months later when the bank started calling me." My mom's face flushed. "Michael, this is not the place." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "this is exactly the place. Because for the past year, I've been painted as the son who abandoned his family. But here's the truth. I was the one making the mortgage payments for months while everyone else ignored the bills. I was the one who got kicked out, literally had my bags thrown on the lawn after being called a burden. And I was the one left holding the bag legally when everything fell apart." I flipped to the next page, a screenshot of the bank's letter clearing me of responsibility. "This," I said, passing it to Aunt Caroline, "is the letter I received after the bank completed their fraud investigation. They confirmed that I was misled about what I was signing and removed the mortgage from my credit record. In other words, I am not the reason the house was foreclosed. I am not the reason they lost everything. I was a victim of what they did, not the cause." There was a long silence. My dad shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tight. My sister was staring at the grass like she wanted to disappear. Finally, my uncle looked at my mom. "Is this true?" he asked. My mom opened her mouth, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a quick excuse or a clever deflection. I let the silence hang for a beat before continuing. "I'm not here to fight," I said, my voice calm. "I just want everyone to know what really happened. I spent years cleaning up other people's messes, paying bills that weren't mine, and being told I wasn't doing enough. That stops now." With that, I closed the binder, slid it back into my bag, and stood. "I won't be staying for dinner," I added quietly. "But I hope this clears things up." I started to walk toward my car, but halfway there, I heard someone call my name. It was Aunt Caroline. "Michael," she said softly, catching up to me. "I'm proud of you. You handled that with grace." I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. "Thanks. I just needed them to hear it." When I got into my car and closed the door, I saw the whole yard still frozen in that stunned silence. For once, no one had anything to say. As I drove away, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just relief, but power. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't lashed out. I hadn't stooped to their level. I had simply told the truth and let it sit there, undeniable. And judging by the looks on their faces, it had landed exactly the way I hoped it would. But the best part wasn't the silence or the looks or even the vindication. It was knowing that from this moment on, the story of what happened wasn't just theirs to tell. It was mine too, and I wasn't done telling it. Driving home from that reunion felt different than any other drive I had ever taken from a family event. There was no knot in my stomach, no rehearsing comebacks I wished I'd said, no guilt weighing me down, just a deep, still calm, like the kind that comes after a storm passes. But the real fallout didn't happen until the next day. I woke up to a string of messages on my phone, some from extended family, some from numbers I didn't even recognize. Most of them were short, didn't know all that. Good for you. We're proud of you for standing up for yourself. My cousin Jake even sent me a screenshot of the family group chat. In it, my mom had written, "Michael ambushed us at the reunion and humiliated us in front of everyone." But then one by one, relatives started replying. "He didn't humiliate you. He told the truth. You can't blame him for this. Honestly, you should apologize." By the time I scrolled to the end, even Aunt Linda, who had always been my mom's biggest defender, had chimed in with, "You've been blaming Michael for too long. Maybe it's time you took a look at yourselves." I can't lie, seeing that made me smile. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. There was a long pause on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "We didn't expect you to come prepared like that," he admitted. "You made us look bad." "You made yourselves look bad," I said calmly. "All I did was show people what actually happened." Another pause. "Your mother," he hesitated. "She's upset. Says she didn't mean to hurt you." I let out a dry laugh. "You don't accidentally put your son on a mortgage without telling him. That wasn't an accident. That was a choice." He didn't argue. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said. "I don't need one. I just need you to stop blaming me for your decisions. I'm done carrying that weight." And then I ended the call. For weeks afterward, I didn't hear from them. No texts, no calls, nothing. Part of me expected another guilt trip, but instead there was just silence. And slowly, word started getting back to me that my parents were keeping to themselves, that they were embarrassed about what happened at the reunion. My sister apparently deleted that dramatic Instagram post she'd made months earlier. And according to Caroline, she'd been avoiding the topic altogether whenever people asked. It wasn't dramatic. There was no screaming, no epic showdown, just a quiet, undeniable shift. For once, I wasn't the family scapegoat. Life moved on. Within a few months, I got another promotion at work, this one putting me in charge of a regional team. I moved into a slightly bigger apartment, bought a better car, and even started traveling a little on the weekends. My credit score climbed back into the green, and eventually I started seriously looking at buying a condo. This time, every document I signed would be double-checked, triple-checked, and completely mine. One Saturday morning, I ran into my sister at a coffee shop in town. It was awkward at first. We hadn't spoken since the reunion, but to my surprise, she approached me. "Michael," she said quietly, fiddling with her cup. "I just wanted to say you were right." I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "All of it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom and Dad, they should have told you. They shouldn't have put you on that loan. I was just going along with them because I didn't want to get involved. But you didn't deserve what happened." I studied her for a moment. There was no smirk this time. No eye roll. She actually looked sorry. "Thank you," I said finally. "That means more than you know." We didn't hug. We didn't suddenly become best friends. But there was something healing about that moment. A tiny crack in the wall that had been between us for so long. The final piece of closure came a few months later when I got an envelope in the mail, a handwritten letter from my mom. It was short, just a page and a half. She admitted that they had been desperate to save the house and hadn't thought through what they were asking of me. She said she was sorry for the way she treated me the night she threw me out, and that she hoped someday we could rebuild our relationship. I didn't cry when I read it, but I did sit there for a long time staring at the page. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the closest thing to one I had ever gotten from her. I wrote back a few days later. My response was simple. "I'm glad you're starting to see things clearly. I've moved on, and I hope you do too. But I won't put myself back in a situation where I'm treated like less than family. If we rebuild this, it has to be on equal ground." I never got a reply, but that was okay. I didn't write it for her. I wrote it for me. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to their chaos. I wasn't cleaning up their mess. I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I was living my life on my terms. And when I finally closed that letter and set it aside, I smiled a small, private smile and whispered to myself, "Ask the burden now." Then I went back to living. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more crazy Reddit tales, and ring the bell so you never miss the next one. And hey, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you would have done in this situation.